What do you normally go by?
Wes is fine.
Thank you for joining me here on 50 Tastes of Grey, Wes. I'm really happy you're here. Tell us a little bit about your normal life before we start talking about the book and the story and your fantasy writing.
Sure. Well, first of all, aloha, Matthew.
Aloha to you, my friend.
Yeah, mahalo. I think that's the right way to pronounce it. Mahalo for taking the time to have me on the show. I'm excited to be here and share a different kind of taste, if you will, the taste of storytelling and thematic exploration. So, to your question, yeah, I'm Wes Al-Dhaher, the creator of the Brotherhood of the Wolf series. Consider it just an overall series. It's a graphic novel series that explores classic heroic storytelling and just a rich history in a setting that a lot of people haven't really seen before. And similar to you, I believe in the power of storytelling and bridging divides. And whether it's through food, as you do, or through art and literature, as I'm doing, I think there's a lot to be said there about using the arts, and I do consider the culinary arts as part of the arts, to really connect with people and explore truth in a way that isn't like overly didactic and dry and boring. So that's what I'm really about, and so I appreciate this conversation that we're going to have for sure.
The creative writing that you're doing right now is really kind of a departure from your normal everyday Wes, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So I used to, I think similar, and this isn't me just trying to artificially map it, but it just seems like there's a lot of resonance. Similar to how like you used to have a career and then you made a drastic shift. Similar with me as well. I started off in healthcare, and you could tell that it taught me a lot about people and dealing with people, but it wasn't what I quite thought. Let me just put it that way. And so I went and transitioned over to tech. So in the course of that, is in the similar how you move to, like, you could say, music to food, I've had to journey from essentially tech to storytelling. It was after a certain amount of success in the tech industry, I decided to pursue a passion project that was on my mind for a long time. I just never had the cojones, Matthew, to kind of pursue. And the inspiration began when I think either late high school or early college, and I read this article, time when blogging was still a thing. I read a guest post by somebody called Shibli Zaman. He's an Afghan guy based in Texas, and he wrote an article called How the Muslims Killed Dracula, and that completely shifted my perspective on because for me, like when I was a kid growing up and we were still doing the Halloween thing, I would always dress up as Dracula. Doesn't matter. One year somebody is Spider-Man, another year they're a pirate. For me, it was Dracula all day. But I never thought of it beyond just the tropes and the archetype. But then when I saw this history, I'm like, whoa! There's an actual real story behind this guy called Vlad the Impaler, also known as Dracula. And furthermore, that he had a younger brother called Radu the Handsome, who either don't hear these stories at all, or if they're told, they're kind of somewhat touched on, but told through a very Hollywood-esque lens. And so, for example, Radu was loyal to the Ottomans and actually fought his brother. And so this led me to a question that was always on my mind, but it really brought it to the surface as to why are Muslims always portrayed as villains in Hollywood? And why are these kind of rich historical perspectives ignored? And that led me down, looking at some of the research on between the late 19th century when movies started becoming a thing, like silent films, till the year, I think, 2000 or something. There were around 1,000 or so movies that featured either Muslims as a religious group or Arabs as a kind of ethnic group. And of those 1,000 films, only 12 showed them to be kind of somewhat decent human beings. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And so okay, this is all interesting information. Hopefully somebody does something about it. And then I just went on my way trying to just make a living with healthcare and then tech. But then I just, at a certain point, I'm like, you know what? It's not getting better, right? And what we're seeing from Hollywood now is before, put aside how Hollywood portrayed Arabs or Muslims or whatever, Hollywood, you could tell that the entertainment industry in general in America had an idea of craft, right? Had pride behind their work, saying, okay, we need to produce works of art that the consumer would enjoy. And so for me, just no, let's solve the multiple problems I'm trying to solve by doing classic storytelling, but told in a very fresh, different way that doesn't just rely on tropes. And so obviously I don't have the budget to make a movie. But I think, we have the wherewithal to make some really good graphic novels that respects graphic novels as a medium and isn't just a maybe movie model that a lot of indie comic book publishers try to do, where they just throw a bunch of storyboards together hoping that, Netflix will throw money at them. I'm like, no, like if we're gonna do the graphic novel thing, we're gonna give it the respect that it deserves. And so I went on a long recruiting journey to get the right people on board, and it took a while to figure things out. And I wrote a bunch of scripts myself that I had to nuke most of because it just wasn't up to the right quality. But I got writers on board who are much better than me, and one of them used to write a bunch of paranormal romances, etc. And so this is a bit of a shift for him. So I think now we're in a good spot. And The Lesser Evil, I think the book that you had a chance to look at is like chapter 0 of the Brotherhood of the Wolf series, and that's how we're starting. Graphic novels, and people talk about comic books and graphic novels. They're both all within the world of sequential narrative art. So, like in fine art, you might have a portrait of the Mona Lisa just like smirking at you. That's not necessarily sequential narrative art because it's not necessarily telling a story in the way that the graphic novels would, which is like, you have images that indicate that stuff is happening through time. And so as you read those images, and oftentimes they're associated with dialogue and some sound effects, like if there's somebody shooting, it's like you see the lettering so going pew, 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 or something like that. And so really that's what comic books, graphic novels, even manga from Japan are. It's like sequential narrative art where story is being told, not so much in prose, where you're relying more on the reader's imagination, which is very powerful, but you're instead having the image that the artist is creating tell a big part of the story, and then you have the dialogue and the sound effects added onto that to enhance the experience and then clarify things. Obviously, it still needs writing because even the artist needs direction on what to draw and how to. But I think that's the main difference. Is like with prose, you're having the reader's imagination do a lot of the heavy lifting. It asks more of the reader to kind of be active and engaging. Whereas with comic books, it's more like you're having the art tell the story, and the reader gets to enjoy like all the little details there and the subtle storytelling details that they might not have thought of if they were to read it in prose. Whereas if you're wanting a more intimate setting where somebody's in their own mind talking about thinking about their relationship with their dead mother or something, yeah, prose might be the way to go. So we're telling stories with a lot of action and some horror and some fantastic elements. We're like, you know what, it's great if we were to show it to readers instead of just write a novel. But it's also good to mix the both. So with The Lesser Evil, the chapter 0 that you had a chance to look at, I decided let's experiment with both. And so half of that story is in prose, and then the other half is in comic book form, but silent, grayscale. And when I say silent, I mean not even dialogue. We just say, let's see if we can meet the challenge of telling the story, continuing the story with just the images and not do any dialogue, and see what that does. Obviously, we won't be doing that in issue number 1 or 2 or anything that comes after that. But for this time, I just wanted to flex and experiment and show readers what we can do.
It's really interesting when taking a look at The Lesser Evil, when it appears as though you kind of tease us and tempt us into looking at the next graphic and then where to fill in the story from that point. Is that kind of how it is? Because it's a different experience as a reader.
Yeah, it is. So like, I'm sure like when you read the prose, you could tell that it was the prose was told in the part of the story where prose would be the best option to do it. But now when the story needed to switch gears into a more an action-oriented situation and more fantastical and horror elements, it's like, okay, let's show it. Even though it didn't necessarily have dialogue, you could still see what's going on and forcing the reader to really pay attention to all the details that the artist put in there. And so it's a different experience for sure. And obviously, yes, building up to issue number 1, where if people finish The Lesser Evil and they're interested, then their appetites are sufficiently wet.
Exactly.
They can continue on.
It appears to me that this kind of material is definitely aimed at folks who dig fantasy and people who grew up looking at comic strips. And
I think it is. If you're a fan of fantasy, particularly dark fantasy, this might be very well your thing. I think what's more important is like if you're a fan of the genre and the characters.
Was there a lot of research that you had to undertake to ensure historical accuracy?
Oh, yeah.
That must have been brutal all by itself.
It is, because I'm like on the team, I'm the history nerd. So I had to like do a lot of research just to make sure that like when Ezra, the writer of the prose section, Ezra wrote the prose section, I wrote the script for the comic book section. When he wrote the prose section, it's like, he needed all these details about the food that people eat and smells and things like that, and I had to look all that up, right? And things are easier in the age of Google, but still, I have like these thick tomes like that from academic institutions like that are this thick and cost over $100 that I have to open up and research and see, hey, what's this detail, etc. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but for me, it's important that people have the idea of like they're sucked into setting and you are here feeling. That's the term that they use, like you are here. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we're looking for. Yeah.
Explain to us a little bit about the main characters you have and their distinct differences between each other.
One of the things I wanted to explore with the Brotherhood of the Wolf is like, I think you might have opinions on this, Matthew, and feel free to push back if you feel like you disagree. But one of the things I'm noticing that's coming out of Hollywood and just like the mainstream publishing world is how males are being portrayed. And this isn't necessarily to say that males need to be portrayed in this overly macho, rah-rah, Sylvester Stallone on his fifth round of steroids type 1980s movie. But one of the things that we're seeing with males is like any males who are portrayed positively, you could see that they tend to be portrayed with having weak personalities. And males who tend to have strong personalities in stories that are coming out from the mainstream tend to be framed as toxic. There's no in between. You're either like a weak vanilla goody two shoes or you're a toxic asshole. There's no just like, so I'm like, I felt like there's an imbalance there. So for me, it's just like our main protagonists are modeled on Jungian archetypes of masculinity. And there's this book written by a couple of Jungian psychologists. And the book I think is called King, Magician, Warrior, Lover. And these are the four archetypes in the Jungian psychological thinking that are associated with male archetypes. You could either, a person would fall into the king archetype where they're a leader and they bring people up. They elevate people just by being around that person. A lover archetype, which as you can imagine, very romantic, but also just very in tune with their senses. I feel like a lot of people in the culinary arts tend to be part of the lover archetype because it's a very sensual type thing. People in the arts in general.
But they kind of relate that to the highly developed feminine sensibility for a man when they're talking about those things.
Yes, exactly. 100%. And one of the things, like each of these archetypes is a shadow archetype, right? So there's a shadow version of the king, which is like the tyrant. There's a shadow version of the lover, which is like one of them is the addicted lover. So, you know, the idea being that like if you're in the lover archetype, you can, be very in tune with the feminine aspects of creation and sensuality. But if it's imbalanced, you can just get addicted, whether it's addicted to substances or addicted to like toxic relationships. So that's the interesting thing is like each archetype has the shadow aspect of it. And then the remaining archetypes, there's like the warrior, which I think is pretty straightforward, and the magician. And the magician, not necessarily somebody who does like takes out a wand and eebidi bobbidi boo Harry Potter stuff, but somebody who can look at the world and figure out like, oh, okay, these are how things work, right? And be able to extract value from that. A shadow aspect, for example, of the magician is the smart-ass know-it-all. You know, the kind of kid you had in school who'd raise his hand and try to answer a question, not because he wants to, participate in the learning experience. He just wants to show how much smarter he is than everybody else in the room. So there's that shadow aspect of as well. And so for me, it's just like we mapped our characters to each of these archetypes. So Koja, who is Nikephoros in the Lesser Evil. In the main series, starting with issue number 1, he's Koja, but he has a different mask, and he's older. He's the warrior archetype, right? And then you have Jem, who's kind of the king archetype. He's a leader, but at this point in his journey, he's very much obsessed with status, as opposed to taking care of the people around him. Haidar is a assassin turned physician who's fills in the lover archetype, and he has some addiction issues. And Munir is a alchemist from Spain who's trying to create the Philosopher's Stone and doesn't have a very good ethical sense of things. So we have these guys, and they're forming a monster hunter guild. And the story of the Brotherhood of the Wolf is talks about how they work together and solve problems with each other and grow or not grow. And that's really the main premise of the story.
If people were going to check out these stories, would Brotherhood come before the Lesser as far as what you would instruct a new reader to take a hold of?
I would recommend the Lesser Evil just because it's less material to have to get through, so it's more of an appetizer. It's more affordable. I mean, they're all premium priced, but the Lesser Evil is the most affordable one of the bunch, and so you can consider it like a low-risk investment to see, hey, do I like this world? And put aside whether or not you like the experimental, silent aspects of the comic book of Lesser Evil specifically. But it's just like, hey, do I like this world? Do I like these characters? And if you do, then I would recommend going to other issues of the Brotherhood of the Wolf. And if not, then hey, no worries. You've made a low-risk investment, and no harm, no foul. So
if people are curious about what era or years or times that these stories take place, what would that be?
So the main series starts with the year 1444.
You said your writing partner was involved in the historical aspects of perhaps the foods that might have been eaten during those times, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well,
what could you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, so like, Ezra, when he was writing, like, scenes, is like, what foods would these guys eat? Like, what foods would a aristocratic family from the Byzantine Empire be eating? And so I had to look up what that would be. And, a lot of it was like pita bread, olives, olive spreads, essentially like a proto-hummus type dish.
Right.
There's like certain desserts, like these like dough balls that are covered in honey and stuff like that. Helps us incorporate that into the story, just to make it more lived in and alive, as opposed to
sure. Everybody loves a camel sandwich, Wes.
Everybody else. I think because you said that, I think I will have to figure out a way to include camel sandwich. I think we need to do that now.
No charge.
I think contrast is important in the arts because I think humans just love it. It got to me to thinking as to what is it about contrast that draws people in so much. Like, in certain stories, it just can't always be horror, action. You have to kind of have like squeeze and release. And so the aspect of squeezing and releasing, what is it about that draws people in so much? And the Lesser Evil, the story that you looked at, the theme for that was literally, choosing the lesser of the two evils. What does that mean when you have to choose a lesser of the two evils? And for us, I think it's exploring themes, moral arguments, and debating both sides of them. It's like taking a moral argument and debating both aspects of it and letting the reader decide. Polychronia
is a great name. Where does that come from?
It's Greek. Yeah.
And what does it mean?
Man, I forgot what it means. Poly means several, many. But
right.
I forgot what it means. Her son, Nikephoros, who would later become Koja in the mainline series, that's like, I think, Light of Victory. It's like a very heroic name. Yeah, no, we try to... I try to be intentional about the kind of names we give these characters.
I can tell.
If you're telling a story, why go with Bob?
Well, Bob for us is very common, but Bob over there might not be.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, that is true.
You're an intriguing guy, and what you're doing, what you're creating is very captivating and darkly atmospheric. And I think that a lot of people are going to really enjoy that.
I think so. I think for us, it's like, I like complexity. I don't like, and maybe this might resonate with you as a chef. It's like, or even as a musician, right? I think there's a difference between complexity and complicatedness. Whereas complicated is just like a lot of different things that there's a lot there, but it just doesn't make any sense and it's not adding value. It's just wasteful stuff. And
it could be confusing too.
Confusing, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I was like, what we try to aim for with the Brotherhood of the Wolf as a series is having complex plot in that there's a lot going on. It's like you can think of it as like John Truby described it as like narrative drive, which is like punch, counter, punch, punch. So the villain does a punch, the hero, the protagonist has to do a counter punch, and the villain punches again. It's just like the more punch, counter, punch you have, the more narrative drive you have, and that's what leads to a lot of complex plot, which people really like these days, which is I think why Netflix and streaming, where you have these shows that tell serialized stories, are much more appealing now than the movies are. Like the difference between a complex dish versus a complicated dish, but you probably might have some ideas on what that might look like.
There's so many different elements in cooking as well as other forms and aspects of the arts. I was just thinking, do you use any ticking clock elements in your storytelling?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's one way to do it because that helps with narrative drive as well. It's not necessarily the only way, but the more you can create urgency that feels organic in a story, the better. We're learning a bunch of different new things. We're having to learn on the fly as we go along, but we got good people on board. And so, for example, with The Lesser Evil, the experimental approach that we took with the silent graphic novel portion of it, where we have these images, but we're not using dialogue balloons. Some people loved it, but there's some people who didn't like it. There's some people who were confused. They're like, what's going on? I'm having a hard time, because they didn't really want to sit down and really pay attention panel to panel and take on all the details. And that's fine, we tried something experimental this first round, and for some people they loved it, other people they didn't, and so it's like, okay, That's fine. That's a learning experience. We probably won't do that again, and we aren't. We'll just do the regular graphic novel thing where we have dialogue, balloons, etc. But it was as a result of us doing something, our artistic statement, and people can say, yeah, I like that, or I didn't like that, but I know it's from Wes, for example.
That's very fascinating stuff. If people are interested in learning more about what you guys are doing, where would they check you out? How could they contact you or see more about what your future holds?
Yeah, one thing that my future needs to hold, Matthew, is better cooking. So I appreciate you giving me the advice on
I can give you
lemon.
lessons. We could do it just like this. No matter how many thousands of miles we are apart, I can help you out.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. But yeah, but to your question, I think the best thing is Tales of Khayr, our website. So we don't sell through Amazon, we don't sell through eBay or anything like that. Our offerings are exclusively through our website, and so that's talesofkhayr.com, which I think
spell that out.
So Tales, TALESOF KHAYR.com. If you go there and you sign up to our free email list where we do not spam people, you'll get a free exclusive access to an exclusive trailer of our series that you can view. And I email out my thoughts once a week, and hopefully they're entertaining and educational. And yeah, that's how people can get access to all these different books and whatnot.
I'm so curious, and I've got to ask you, because so many people who are artistic don't know how to really kind of bridge the gap between art and business. And I'm just wondering, from my perspective, why not work with Amazon? Why not work with a lot of the people who can get a lot of eyeballs on you? And I understand the creative endeavor and the ego endeavor of keeping it on your own site, but what about the business side of your art?
That's a great question, Matthew. And so the thing with Amazon is there are trade-offs. So not as many people will be able to buy. Well, listen, let me put it this way. As many people will be able to buy my book, not as many people will know about it. Right? And I want to be able to have that relationship with the fans that relying on Amazon won't really give us. And also, with Amazon has Amazon, if they don't like you, they will really mess you up as an author. So for some, there's one book that's somewhat socio-politically controversial. It's a nonprofit book that I think has a certain editorial view about the trans movement. And Amazon just delisted it. They chose not to sell it, right? It's okay, so Amazon just decided to make an editorial decision, just not remove this book from their website. I'm okay, well, that's something. What if I said something that they didn't like? Would they get rid of my books? And yeah, am I leaving money on the table as a creator by doing that? Sure. The relationship with the fans is really more important to me. Furthermore,
right.
Our comic books specifically, and our graphic novels, we're only selling them physical copies. We're not doing digital. And the reason for that is, I will quote the esteemed late great Stan Lee of Marvel Comics, who said that comic books are like boobs. Sure, it's nice to look at one on a computer, but it's much better to have one in your hand. And that's not a very classy way to say it.
I can't argue.
But it's a very good point. And so that's why it's just when it comes to our graphic novel offerings, they're exclusively physical, so direct to your mailbox.
Right. Oh, okay. That totally makes sense. Wes, it's been so cool to get to meet you and to talk about what you're up to. And I really hope that you have a wonderful future with all your books and projects that are coming up.
Oh, thanks so much, Matthew. I appreciate it. And if at any point, in the context of getting excited and passionate, I called you Michael instead of Matthew, forgive me.
That's funny that you bring that up, because it's been happening my entire life. People have called me Michael.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, you should do the Seinfeld thing, the Seinfeld chef thing, and just say, no soup for you, if they do that. No, you call me Michael, no soup for you.
It's funny. And then the people who have my name right, they want to know if I'm Matt or Matthew. What do I want to be called? It's just it doesn't really matter. Let's just have a good conversation.
Yeah.
Michael or otherwise.
Funny.
Wes, thank you so much for spending time with me here on 50 Tastes of Grey. I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thank you so much, Matthew, and much appreciated.
Now we can say aloha.
Aloha, and what was the other one? Maloha?
Mahalo?
Mahalo,
means
okay.
Thank you. Aloha means a ton of different things, like goodbye, hello, I love you, that kind of thing.
All right, so mahalo for having me, and aloha. There we go.
Let me tell you a funny story about the word mahalo. A lot of people who come here they're walking around Hawaii and they look over and they see the word mahalo written on the side of a trash bin. And people think automatically, they associate it being on the side of a trash bin that mahalo means trash. But the fact of the matter is that mahalo is written on trash bins, thanking you for throwing away your trash inside the bin.
Yeah, that's intuitive. Okay, so it's funny. People think that it means trash. Oh, that's so funny.
I know. It really is. And so we have, us locals have kind of a fun time with that.
I'm sure, like, I can think of those of you who are inclined to pranks doing some pranks.
Oh, yes. And that would be you and me, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Do you have any kids?
I have two. Yeah, two toddlers. Well, yeah, one 5-year-old and one 2-year-old. Yeah, it's.
Okay, so you're kept very busy, I'm sure.
I am. Yeah, but anybody who can, I encourage anybody to have kids, just because it's a lot of fun, and it makes, for somebody who's has big ego energy like me, it helps you not be so egotistic, because there's other people you have to think about and worry about, etc.
So do you think the people who we run into have huge egos but don't have children, we should just tell them to go have kids? Well, thank you, brother. It's really been nice getting to know you a little bit. Thank you.
Ditto. Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.